My name is Sherry, and I'm with Two Rivers Community Land Trust, which is in the East Metro. We go from Ramsey County, which is where Rondo covers, all the way to the Wisconsin border with Washington County. And my co-presenter today is...
I'm Brenda Lano. I'm from the west side of the suburbs. I cover the western portion of Hennepin County, which is all the communities in Hennepin County except for the city of Minneapolis. So it's homes within reach.
Okay, and just so everybody knows what session we're in, today is the Capital Improvement Plans review. And this is a topic that comes up frequently with land trusts because we have resale restrictions, and I know that for myself, we have a capital improvement policy, and I've been in my position since 2016, and since that time, we've revised it twice, both times to try to improve on it. So I'm hoping that we have some good discussion today, a sharing of ideas, and maybe I can improve on it yet again, because I still think it has room for additional improvement. So some of what we're going to cover today: definitions, benefits and goals, why do we do this? A discussion of the definitions, like just exactly what is a qualified capital improvement, and then also a discussion of some other definitions that might come into play when you're looking at doing a capital improvement plan. Some policy comparisons, so we took a look at some existing policies that are out there and put together a matrix and compared how they're alike and how they're different. Some examples then of what does it look like when you actually do the numbers with the resale formulas. Some best practice that you should keep in mind, and those are some of the lessons that maybe we learned the hard way on best practice, so we can have a conversation about that. And some wrap-up discussion. We'll also give you a list of the work cited. Okay, so on to the goals. Okay, so a qualified capital improvement policy, and these goals we pulled from some existing policies. So it's to incentivize maintenance improvements to the home, but it's also to encourage homeowners to make improvements, to ensure that our homes are maintained, to prolong the useful life of our homes, to preserve the affordability, keep them attractive and functional for future buyers. And the last one, to provide clarity to owners about maintenance and improvements. That one is one where we have focused quite a bit on what exactly is maintenance and how do you educate homeowners on maintenance. And that seems like a topic for next year's session, and not the discussion for today, but definitely a topic to consider.
So first we're going to get into what are the definitions. What constitutes a post-purchase improvement? And here we kind of want to get some of your thoughts. What do you think is a post-purchase capital improvement? So some policies would say updating a kitchen. No, that's maintenance and repair. That's keeping your home up to what it is. Building a garage where one doesn't exist, definitely most would consider a capital improvement. So it really comes down to what works for your organization and what do you want to spell out. Typically, most organizations, it seems, have defined that qualified capital improvement as an improvement that adds market value, accommodates the changing needs of a household, improves accessibility, improves energy efficiency, and then there's possibly some others. But when we look at this, again, most do this, but there's some that say, you know, accessibility doesn't always add value. So then it takes away from that top one, market value. Accessibility might make sense for one person, but for the next family, they might not need the ramp or want the ramp. Or, for instance, we recently had a resale where they did do accessibility, and in order to make a bathroom accessible, they had to eliminate a closet in a bedroom. So taking a 3-bedroom down to a 2-bedroom and 1 den. So for our next buyer, that was a deterrent. And our home seller actually had to reduce the price of their home based on that. So some of these things might improve, might not. So it comes down to you as an organization. What do you want to say really truly is a benefit and what isn't? That's why it comes down to having very clear and defined written guidelines around what do you have as a capital improvement plan. Sherry has revised hers twice since 2016. The organization that I took over has a very loose capital improvements plan. And so when we got the first person that called and said, well, this is what they wanted to do, I pulled out that plan, and then as I looked through it, I went, whoa, there's no consistency here. It's been, over the past 20 years, it's kind of been a rhyme or reason. Whatever staff was there at the time could say, yeah, that one works, no, that one doesn't. And I'm very much a written rules, you follow the rules, and it makes for less gray, and it makes for treating all of our homeowners the same when you have that clarity. So that's why we're here. That's one of the things there, as we get to the next slide. Is there a policy or is there no policy? What is a capital improvement? What is a repair and maintenance that's needed? So on our program, we do put in all new furnaces. They're all energy efficient. But down the road, if someone stays in their home 10, 15 years, 20 years, the furnace probably is going to need to be replaced. Are we encouraging them to replace with something that's the same or better, or just to get by? So it really comes down to what is your policy? So there's many examples here in Minnesota. We don't all do them the same. And across the country, we found that there's many different things that are out there. The biggest thing is really, first off, you want to look at what's a capital improvement and what is a capital replacement system. And are you going to give credit for those things as well? There's an incentive-based approach where there's a list of selected maintenance and repairs. And along with those, there are definite time frames of a benefit. So someone puts in a new furnace, that's good for X amount of years. Somebody puts in on a new roof, that's good for so many years, and it kind of depreciates down the road. Those are some very complex. When I was researching this and looking, some organizations had lists of 60 different items that they looked at as a capital improvement. Others were very, very cut and dry. It was if you're adding finished square footage to an unfinished space or adding a garage, that's all a capital improvement is. Anything else is considered maintenance and repair. Some organizations went with absolutely no policy. Their policy was, this is home ownership. This is what homeowners do. They maintain and they improve their properties. And if we're looking at an appraisal-based return, it should come out to play. So it really comes down to sitting down and having a conversation with your board and maybe with a group of homeowners in your program to say, what do you feel works and what is fair? Because again, as Sherry had said, we want people to maintain and keep up their homes. We don't want to get them back in bad repair. But at what point is it on them, and at where should we be getting a return on that investment? So if somebody had already executed something, that needs to say that's grandfathered in. That's the terms there. But you need to, if you're changing that policy, you need to be very precise to let all of your homeowners know that here's the new policy and moving forward, this is what we're going to do.
We don't change the ground lease. The ground lease addresses maintenance and improvements to the property. So the policy is separate from the ground lease. And when I say we've changed it on our third revision, it was improving it, and it was not, it was clarifying more than changing what we would accept. It was more clarification pieces. So whatever was approved before is still approved. but it clarified details because it seems like somebody always thinks of something you hadn't thought of if you have like that list of 60. And so we had quite a bit of discussion about that. And then also our original policy didn't cover anything like maintenance, like a roof or a furnace. And even though we set up our homeowners with room in their budgets to plan for repairs that need to be done in their homes, I frequently would get calls saying, my furnace went out and I need a new furnace, what do I do? And that's not covered under our capital improvements, and they haven't set aside funds to plan for this, so then we had to kind of look at how could we address some of those maintenance issues, and we decided to add a section called useful life. It adds to the useful life of the home, which a furnace would or a roof would, we would include those items. So it's more revising and enhancing. So
I think on top of that, revising and enhancing, what comes up is you expect to buy a house with a working furnace. So your seller puts in a furnace because theirs went out, and now they're in a situation where they need to sell the next year. When you do your appraisal, the fact that that furnace is brand new probably adds very little to the appraised value of that home. So now your homeowner isn't getting out as much as they feel they should. So that's where that capital replacement comes into play. So there is a case to do we should have done this as both a capital replacement and a capital improvement, but that's for next year. Here in Minnesota, there's an Energy Plus program and you pay extra, but it covers like repairs and maintenance on appliances, furnaces, air conditioning. It can cover a portion of a replacement value. So yes, we have that, and that is something when we have our home buyer meetings that we talk about. We don't require it, obviously. It's a cost and an expense. Some people would prefer to just keep the money set aside their own money and put it in the bank, but sometimes if someone's on a tight budget or doesn't know how to do these things, it might be good. So we do have that here. So when we looked at this, there was the case to have a policy in place. Again, some of them are incentive-based, so if you do these things, therefore you will get this, that return on investment. Others use more of a penalty-based approach where when it came time to go to sell at a resale, they would come in and then look at, you didn't do this and you didn't do that. And is that really capital improvement, or is that a deferred maintenance issue? So to me, that was one where I wasn't sure. And then there were also these hybrid approaches where they did list out specific things. So they had that definite capital improvement where you maybe added a bathroom where one didn't exist, or a garage where one didn't exist, or finished off a basement to add a family room and another bedroom. Those were definite, clear things. But then that hybrid policy addressed those issues like, I just put on a new roof and it cost me $18,000, and you're telling me I'm not getting anything when I'm selling the house a year or two later. So those are kind of those plans where Sherry had said in their policy, they started looking at, if you do these things, there is a return on investment over time, and it does depreciate. But it gives them a little bit of a return on investment and an incentive to keep their home in good repair and move forward with what we feel they should do, which is maintain and keep that house up and improve it if possible. Then there was also the case for no policy whatsoever. And some of the organizations, we have one here in Minnesota, in Rochester, where they have no capital improvement policy. And their thought is home ownership is home ownership. They can do this to their homes. But on the flip side, the return on investment for those homeowners when they go to sell, their resale formula is higher than what most of ours are. So that's where they feel there's the give and the take. There is no capital improvement policy, but when they sell, they get more. So the penalty approach talks about the need for certain repair items over the life of the house. And they list out what they believe are requirements of home ownership: replacing roofs, furnace, if you've got wood siding, keeping it painted so that it doesn't rot, those kind of things. And they list out what those things are, and then their policy, it didn't state what the penalties were, but the policy stated that at the time of resale, before the resale can happen, the organization can come in and require specific maintenance items to be addressed because it affects the resale value of that home. So that was where, call it penalty, call it incentive, but they clearly stated up front when you buy this home, if you don't do these things, there will be a penalty. And the other thing is the organization can buy it back at a reduced price because these were the deferred maintenance that were ignored. So that's kind of how their policy laid out. The really big piece to look at is, why are you doing any of these policies? Whether you have one or don't, what is the reason you're doing it? And a lot of it comes down to the administrative burdensome of oversight. So you got to look at, when you're looking at developing your policy, you can't just develop it and let it sit there on the shelf. Somebody has to maintain that policy. They have to enforce that policy. They have to document and make sure things are taken care of. That's one of the things that made me curious about this is I found out that there was approval for capital improvements in our program, but then when I went to look at, well, you told them that they could put in this new kitchen, you gave them the okay to do it, but there's nothing documented on what's the return on their investment. And if they come back and say, well, I was told I get 100% return on this investment, and here's my receipts that say I spent $56,000 on it. Well, if they did that 15 years ago, that's not a new kitchen today. So if you're not tracking and documenting and don't have the staff to maintain that, you're going to have issues and problems. So with that, we're going to move on to other considerations and definitions and discussions. Affordability, balancing the respect for affordability and decency. So say someone comes and they do say they want to redo their kitchen and they want to put in granite countertops. Do you say no? Because that's, some consider a luxury item. But in reality, in today's world, is that a luxury item? 20 years ago, I'd say yes, but in a smaller home, it may only cost the homeowner a few more $100 to do that. So is your policy to say absolutely no, or is there a gray area there that you can say you can do that, but it may not be the best return on investment? So you want to look at that affordability. The other piece you want to look at is if somebody's adding square footage. Is it adding square footage to the existing footprint of that home, or are they adding an addition? And what's that impact? Is it going to keep this home affordable moving forward, or are they over-improving and putting this out of affordability for the next buyer? So that's one of the things you really want to make sure you have defined clearly in your plan that you develop, is how does it affect affordability moving forward with the resale? How do you define the added value? Is it just market value? Again, let's go back to that accessibility. For some folks, the accessibility is a huge added value, especially if I need it. But for someone else, that might not be an added value. And for some appraisers, it might even detract in the appraisal. So again, looking at how do you define what added value is. On accessibility, the most often way it was defined and the return on investment was they would have it built, and whatever it cost, the CLT would give them 50% credit. So if it cost $2,000 to put a ramp in, what they would get is a $1,000 value on that. That was pretty much across the board. And when we, at the end of the PowerPoint, there will be all the examples that are cited. But that is one, we have quite a few of our homes where we've had to add ramps or do accessibility. We've never denied it. And most often, an exterior ramp is easy to take down and remove, and we'll have our contractors help if that's the need. It's really more about some of the interior things. But other than the one house where the closet had to go away, we've never had anyone coming in as a buyer saying, well, I don't like the rails in the bathroom. let's face it, we all get older and someday we might need that. So it hasn't been huge, but it is one of the ones that was really, as we looked at things, accessibility was all over the board on is it or isn't it? What's the value in it? But I agree, when we look at the populations that we serve, and often those are the folks that don't get an opportunity at home ownership as often, we should be helping them. And it is about making it better for their lifestyle. One of the things, our model is acquisition, rehab, resale. So because we're doing all that rehab work and we are putting in the new furnaces, new air conditioning, water heaters, insulation, we get a lot of rebates. And so right now we're toying with the idea of taking all of that rebate funds and putting that into a pool of money, putting it in the bank, letting it make interest, and being able to maybe do some low interest loans for our homeowners moving forward. Because things come up that they can't do. Requalification. This is something that our organization came across and started to consider. And it really comes down to, are we trying to provide homes? We always say we're never going to force anyone to sell, and we don't. But when we talk to funders, we talk about the fact that this is a one-time investment and it's passed on to the next homeowner. So does your capital improvement policy incentivize people to move forward or to stay in place? And why this requalification for the program came up is in our organization, we had someone who wanted to do a capital improvement. They were actually easy to say no to because they actually wanted to take the roof off of their house and build a second story. And our old policy clearly said they couldn't do that. But these homeowners, when they came to us, they had a plan in place, and it was over 200,000, it was 175,000 something to do this, over 200,000. They had a significant amount of money. They just needed to borrow a small amount on a home equity line of credit to do this. And we couldn't let them do it, and as in talking to them, because they couldn't do that plan, they were looking at other things, could we do this or could we do that? Well, as we talked to them, we realized that, they're not 80% AMI anymore. They were like at 120% AMI. They clearly had saved a ton of money, and they could afford to go buy out in the community. So it's something to think about. We are planning in the late winter to have a retreat with some of our staff and our board members to discuss our capital improvements policy and how we want to move forward. And it's one of the things that we put on our list. Do we want to look at a income limit or requalify for the program if it's something excessive that they want to do? Obviously, if you're redoing a bathroom or a kitchen, you wouldn't do that. But if you're adding that square footage and making the home bigger because your family has grown or your circumstances have changed and you want a larger home, is it something we should consider? There were a few examples that I ran across, but as I was researching this and looking at how many organizations there are across the United States, we clearly couldn't get to all. So it's something that I will continue to look into. And then again, do you want to add to your policy that piece on useful life, where it may not be what you would consider a capital improvement, but it's definitely something that's adding value, and that's that useful life. For larger things like the roofs, the furnace, the bigger costs that they may not show value in that appraised model that we have, but it is adding value, and our homeowners did spend their money on it, and should they get something? So that's another thing you want to take a look at. So we just kind of did a little policy comparison here. So we looked at the Champlin Housing Trust, the Community Justice Land Trust, Homestead, Madison, and then Sherry's Two Rivers policy. And, we looked at what is, gosh, and it's so small on my thing I can't see it. What is an eligible improvement? And, we kind of goes all over the board. from work done to the home that increases the market value and is above and beyond general maintenance or replacement of existing items. And then Champlin, they give examples of that. So they're very clear on, you know, this is something that adds additional value. It's not replacement. It's not general maintenance. The community justice went with 3 types of capital improvements. They specifically say if you're adding a bedroom, that's a capital improvement. If you are improving the energy efficiency and reducing the cost to the home to heat it, that's definitely one. And then theirs is that accessibility. And they were the ones that, for that, they use 2 different models. One is what value it adds. The other is 50% of what it costs to construct it. Homestead, they use a schedule-based approach to their capital improvements, which also does some of the replacement costs. And some things might be categorized as a capital replacement, others as simply maintenance. The Madison Area Land Trust, everything goes through an approval process, so it's not clear-cut right from the beginning. If you want to do something, you come in and there's a committee and a board that looks at it and approves it. But typically, it's to change, if it's to accommodate the changing needs of the household, because family sizes increase, so they want to put in another bedroom, or there's an accessibility issue, or that energy efficiency. And then again, they do some of the certain general maintenance. And then Two Rivers, which is Sherry's, capital improvements are the addition of a permanent structure or the restoration of some aspects of the property that either enhance the property's overall value or increases its useful life. And then there's some gray areas in the maintenance. So it was, but the next one is, when can you do this work and what do you do? Every single person was very clear on, if you start work before you've contacted the organization and got approval, it's no longer a capital improvement. It's off the board, you don't get it. And the formulas for credit were all over the board. Some are at the time of transfer. So for instance, if it's a house that had an unfinished basement and the homeowner put in another bedroom, a bathroom, and a family room, it's easy to have an appraiser come in and say, you know, they did all this work. Doesn't matter if they did it 10 years ago or today, but the appraiser can easily say, here's what the home is worth with an unfinished basement, here's what it's worth with the condition it's finished in right now. So it would take into effect some of the depreciation that happens if it was a 20-year-old improvement. So some do that, and others with Champlin, one of the interesting thing was some of the things that they give credit for never ever depreciate. And that seemed odd because in my world, everything depreciates, even me. So, but there were certain examples, and again, you'll get where we found all this at the end of the presentation. Community justice, they cap the amount of credit available due to ensure the affordability. So regardless of what you're doing there, everything gets capped. And they're just making sure that you're getting credit for what you're doing, but you're not getting 100% of that credit, and they're always protecting that subsidy that's in there. Much like our resale formula always works, regardless. So that's how it's just embedded in theirs. Homestead, it depended on whether it was a capital improvement or a system replacement. They definitely have 2 clear paths on both. And with their capital replacement, there is that depreciation schedule attached to it. The capital improvements didn't have that. Madison, it's at the time of the sale to the next buyer. They do it as is appraised value at that time. There are organizations, I think, typical of older organizations that maybe haven't looked at this. I've been doing this work since 2009, and our policy where I'm at now is one that did an appraisal at that time and gave you 100% return on investment. So again, you put a bathroom in 20 years ago and you haven't kept it up, you're getting full value of what it cost you to put it in at that time. So, or what it appraised for at that time. So to me, that one is not the way to go, because again, things depreciate. To me, the the appraisal base at the time of resale is probably the best approach. With the Madison, they do that as an appraisal based as is, and it's the opinion of the value, assuming that there is something. Sometimes the appraiser might say there is no value. So to me, that's also becomes that social piece. Are we really going to go down that road and say, well, you improved it, but your appraiser's saying there's absolutely no value, so we're not going to give you anything? So again, we're not here with the answers. We're here because as we navigated this, there were so many questions, and there seems to be no right or wrong, and what works in one community may not work in another. It also comes down to who is the populations that you serve. Are you serving much lower income, higher income? It really, there's so many variables to look at. And again, Sherry's company, or Sherry's organization, Two Rivers, they do two tracks. It's the appraisal base for additional space, where you might get 100% of that value, or 50% of the cost after rebates if you sell the home within 5 years. So they tie some things to that. And I think Sherry's going to go through how monetarily some of these things play out.
Well, and just an additional comment, so homeowners always come up with things that you never thought of. So when I said we strengthened our policy, for example, we had someone that had an approved bedroom with an egress window in the lower level, and they got as far as putting in the egress window and came back and said, well, do I get credit for the egress window? That's as far as we got. And so we had to be really kind of draw a hard line on it's a finished project, not partial pieces here and there. So that's another thing to look at. And then the other reason that we thought this was important to keep as a policy is that the ground lease does cover maintenance, and deferred maintenance can be collected at the time of resale or required to be done at the time of resale, but that's also a hard nut to enforce at resale. So on to what do the numbers look like. Okay, so we're going to start with an example. We'll look at two different strategies. So we're going to assume that the homeowner has owned their home for 25 years and replaces the siding at a cost of $30,000. And 10 years into their home ownership, the original market, at 10 years into their home ownership, excuse me, the original market value was $167, and the current market value is $330. So that's our premise that we're working off of. So here's the two examples. So both homeowners in each of the examples purchased the home. Purchased the home. The home buyer price was $125. So example number one, they put a cap on the maximum qualified capital improvement amount of $25,000. Example number two does not.